full of water, it's hard to imagine that you'd actually find anything if there's anything there. And excavating is next to impossible because the Sphinx is, I mean, arguably, archaeologically, it's the most sensitive hotspot in all of archaeology, and it's in terrible ruinous condition. So to try and excavate down there, and then they'd have to build a cofferdam to pump the water out because the water's coming in, faster. You can't just dig down there because it'll fill up with water since it's below the water table level quicker than you can pull it out. So you need to erect a special kind of a dam called a cofferdam. So it's actually pretty unlikely, at least in the foreseeable future, that anybody actually finds out what's there. But from my point of view, everybody's fascinated. This is the Edgar Cayce thing, that the Hall of Records is under the paw of the Sphinx that contains the secrets or the history of Atlantis. I don't dismiss that at all. It's just that given the practicality of what's involved in excavating, I just put it out of my mind and stick with the geology, because the geology we can prove.
Right.
And take it from there. But
interesting question from Bob. Why is it important for governments to make the pyramids appear not as old as they truly are?
No, well, that's more complicated than it looks. We think that the pyramids are built in stages, and even the academics say that the Giza Plateau is a single plan. In other words, they don't start off building one pyramid and then they say, oh, well, let's build this other one over here a couple of 100 feet, and then let's set this other smaller one here off the axial line. Even they think that it's a single, let's say, unified Giza Plateau plan, but of course they don't buy the much more extreme dating. But we have lots of evidence. In fact, this applies to the question that was asked before with the pyramids themselves, that they're built in stages via architectural style. So we're quite certain, we're very certain, that we can prove that. Great Pyramid is more of a problem, but we think we have some pretty interesting evidence that even that is built in stages. So, wait, Scott, how do we get to this question? Further evidence? What was it? Wait, I lost the question, Leena.
Oh, he was just saying that why is it important for governments to make
Oh, yeah. Well, actually, the government, it's not really the government's fault. The government is just parroting. It's just reiterating what their academics are telling them. So they're not going to argue that. I mean, even if they personally, which in fact is the case in certain cases, even if they think that our geology is correct and the dating is incorrect, they're not going to argue with their own Egyptologists and archaeologists. So they repeat the party line because they're not in a position to argue with the party line. We are, and we do, but
right.
until the whole thing gets established, and this is why Göbekli Tepe is so important, because they cannot anymore use the argument that it's all hunter-gatherers back then. So all we need now is a couple of $1 million to do our show, and really we'll bust the paradigm once and for all. So it's not the governments that are to blame. Actually, this applies. It's funny. The way history gets written in sound bites. For example, with Galileo proving, wasn't even Galileo, he was the one who made all the noise. Copernicus proving that the sun went around, that the Earth went around the sun, and it's always church bad, Galileo good. That it was the church that was against Galileo, and kept, and gave him all, put him in house arrest and all the rest of it. Actually, it wasn't really the church itself. The Pope didn't care. The Pope had his own problems with the 30-year war that was going on at the time. It was the academics, who were, of course, all churchmen, In those days, I mean, if you were an intellectual, there's no such thing as an atheistic philosopher in those days. They were all staunch Catholics. But it was the academics that actually convinced the Pope to hound, to actually to go after Galileo. The Pope himself couldn't have cared less. Actually, if I recall, there was a very interesting book called The Trial of Galileo, big, thick book by that extraordinary writer, Giorgio de Santillano, who wrote Hamlet's Mill. This book was written in the 50s. It tells you much more about the trial of Galileo than anybody actually wants to know, but really pretty amazing. And it comes out in the book that the church is, to a certain extent, maligned. It was the academics who were hounding Galileo, same as with us.
It's always, the same story.
Academics. Yeah, because the religion, actually for the Pope, from a religious point of view, it's not that big a deal. But from an academic point of view, it's a very big deal. So, yeah, anyway, on the subject. So it's not the government so much. The government is just repeating what their own experts tell them. They don't care.
John.
From their point of view, we're in fact, Zahi, who I get along with personally pretty well, he's no longer in power, and I haven't met the new guy yet, but I always used to say to Zahi, once we buried the hatchet and got on reasonably good personal terms, that I'd say, Zahi, this whole Sphinx theory has given Egypt more good publicity since Tutankhamun's tomb. And he said, John, you are right. As far as the government's concerned, the controversy is very healthy. It brings lots of tourists to Egypt.
Richard also asked that, where are the homes, the pottery, and etc. of the Sphinx builders? Does John believe they are yet to be discovered under the sands?
No, probably not, because whatever was responsible for destroying that civilization was probably catastrophic and might well have been a tsunami or something like that. I mean, there aren't any homes even of the ancient Egyptians, or almost none, because the homes are on the floodplain and everything was built of mud brick. In fact, even the pharaohs, this is again talking dynastic Egypt, the pharaohs' palaces were built of mud brick. Only the temples were built of stone, so we have almost no evidence, a few little bits and pieces here and there of the palaces of the pharaohs. So, not surprising that you don't have any any other evidence of dwelling places and so on for the Sphinx.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, around there were the homes of the workers who were working the Giza Plateau later on, but that's all dynastic Egypt.
Mm-hmm. Bobby is asking, in the book Mysteries of the Pyramids by David H. Lewis, he talks about the halls of knowledge which have been discovered under the Pyramid of Cheops. And what is your opinion on that claim?
I don't know that book, and actually I know of no such stuff discovered under the pyramid. There's a whole literature of, let's say, visionary literature of underground chambers and underground passages and all of that sort of thing. And I don't even dismiss those claims, but they're not proven. And from my point of view, until it's not scholarship, until you can actually, visions are no good in the sense that it's not even that they're not true. You can't use them for scholarship. So I don't know that book by David Lewis, but I am very certain that there is nothing that would satisfy scholarly requirements that would support that claim.
All right. Starlight wants to know if you think that the head of the antiquities has suppressed information.
If you're talking about Zahi, no,
yes.
I don't actually. I don't, because I know Zahi pretty well. But I mean, he's no longer there. But Zahi, I as I said, I know him pretty well, and He's got this big ego, and but if it were sufficiently, if he got convinced that the theory is is correct, that something heretical was correct, I don't think he'd hide it, because it would be to his own glory to get on the other side. And actually, we were hoping that if we got our money together and got our sequel to Mystery of the Sphinx up and out and made a big splash, that Zahi would, if the evidence were presented to him in a certain way, we thought there was a good chance that he might turn around, because he would recognize that the scholarly winds had turned, and it would be in his own interest to suddenly get open-minded. But now we don't know. The new guy, I don't know. I know nothing about him whatsoever, other than my pal Mohammed tells me that he was in one. I haven't spoken to him actually in quite a while, in a few weeks. But he tells me that he played some role in getting the new guy in place. So that's a good sign, because Mohammed, you may remember, we called him the surgeon, because he knows how to operate. And if Mohammed is friendly with the powers that be there, that's for us a very good sign. So
yes, I remember Mohammed very, very well.
Yeah, he's a wonderful man. Unfortunately, had a stroke a few years ago, a pretty serious one. So he's a lot recovered, but he's still not the old Mohammed. He's okay.
Oh.
He's working hard and all of that, but he's not the old Mohammed.
John,
anyway.
Here's another very interesting question from Starlight. Has Mr. West ever tried playing a tonal sound in the King's Chamber? If so, what happened?
Oh, sure, we do that all the time. We chant in the King's Chamber, or set up an Om, and sometimes we have people with us who are professional at that. And it becomes, when you do it, I mean, it's the most amazing echo chamber in the whole wide world. And we are 100% convinced, Jacques and myself, that resonance plays a major role in whatever that chamber, in fact, whatever the entire structure is supposed to signify. So we do that, and people get, it's a very emotional experience. Will we do that on your trip, Leena?
Yes.
Yeah, we did, right. I mean,
in a pitch black darkness, and shortly after that, if you remember, I asked you for permission to lay in the sarcophagus.
Oh yeah, well, we always do that too.
Yeah,
right?
And then after I climbed out of there, you said, people urinate in there. Thanks a lot, John.
No, well, they didn't by then, but they did the first time I was ever in there, and somebody wanted to take a picture of me, and that was the first trip I ever did, way back in late 70s or something, and somebody had peed in there, so I had to make a hasty retreat to the hotel to change clothes. That was my spiritual experience of the coffer and the King's Chamber. But yes, we do that, and we always do that on my trips, and spend have a couple of hours of meditation in there. And as you know, it's very few people come out of that unmoved. It's everybody has different kinds of experience. I mean, some of the experiences are very life-changing. People speak in tongues sometimes. All sorts of things happen, but mostly it's a profound and sort of sense of a luminous peace that is not. Practiced meditators can get into that through lots and lots of practice, but in the Great Pyramid puts people in a state that under most circumstances you can't get into, or you certainly can't get into easily. And we're absolutely convinced that that's why that the pyramid is not a tomb. Anyhow, there's no evidence that it was ever a tomb, and it doesn't make any sense as a tomb, and all of the pyramids are very, very different from each other, and their internal structures are very different, and there's a kind of a, let's say there's a kind of a rationale to normal Egyptian funerary architecture. I mean, in any other discipline in the world than Egyptology, they'd be laughing at the notion that the pyramids were tombs. But as I said, the power of the Church of Progress is such that it's too awkward to suggest that a civilization, I mean, forgetting about the Sphinx even for the moment, but a civilization that was in place in 3000 BC actually had a science and was anything other than gross superstition, even though the architectural evidence for Egypt is so astounding. I mean, it's a disconnect that no matter how often I talk about it or write about it, which of course I do often, it's hard for people who aren't personally involved in the quest to appreciate how people can come out with such stupidities and still be PhD Egyptologists and archaeologists, but that's the case.
Do you think that the revolution has slowed down research in Egypt?
Oh, maybe momentarily, but I don't think so by much. I mean, the revolution, when I was there, everybody was talking about it. They were all excited about it in Egypt. It has, it's not a pro-democracy revolution. It's an anti-corruption revolution, and not even an anti-corruption revolution. It's an anti-poverty revolution, and no amount of change is going to change that, because Egypt is a country with 83 million people struggling along in a country that could handle 50 million in a pinch. I mean, not even comfortably, but manageably. With 83 million, there's just the resources aren't there. If they had Muhammad as the prime minister and Jesus for the vice president, they couldn't make that country work. And so to imagine that all of a sudden they're going to have democracy and elect one bunch of crooks instead of another bunch of crooks, the ones who were in there, that it's going to make a difference, it's not. And sooner or later, I don't know what's going to happen. I mean, the Egyptians being the Egyptians are, you know them, they're wonderful, sunny people, and they're not, let's say, they don't have the kind of violence in them that certain of the other countries have, the more warlike countries have by their nature. So we just don't know, but I hope that the whole thing doesn't explode into a civil war, and it might not. They might find a way to muddle on through. I mean, truly, when Mubarak was there, there was plenty of corruption at the top, and the rich were skimming, were ripping off the poor, but it was absolutely no worse than what's going on in this country, in certain ways, maybe even better. But it's unmanageable, but if it just keeps on being unmanageable in the same way, I can't imagine that even if the Muslim Brotherhood takes over some of the functions there, I don't think they will, actually. I don't think they have enough popular support. But even they're religious, but they're not the Taliban. I mean, they might not want some people wandering around in bikinis on the street. But really, they're not going to want all the women in veils. The tourists are as important to them as they're to anyone else. And one of the horrible things about Egypt is that all of this stuff, see, the press is really responsible for a lot of the grief that Egypt is going through, because, as I said, we went through the entire revolution, and we did it. Anybody could have done it. Any tour agency that was well enough run could have said, the hell with what the government has said. Let's just stick it out, and we'll get to places, and we'll be okay. And they would have been okay. So
you're absolutely right.
So thousands and thousands of people lost their jobs or are starving to death because of the press, who I call the prostitutes.
Yes. Well, when we were there, the one thing that was very, very evident, that in the middle of Cairo at 3 o'clock in the morning, I felt safer than I do in Houston in the middle
Oh,
of
you
the
bet.
day.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. That's the Egyptian people. You might not feel safer if you're in the middle of Morocco somewhere, but yeah, the Egyptians are, are very different people from anyone else. I mean, they're Muslims, but they're not Iraqis, and they're not Saudis, and they're not Afghanis. They're themselves, and they're. I mean, there's nothing wrong with the others either, but the Egyptians have a particular this sunny quality that you experience when you're there. And after a couple of days, everybody says that. Oh, we've been heard all of this crap from the press and all of this is dangerous, and they hate Americans and blah blah blah. No, they don't hate Americans. They hate the government, the American government, but they don't hate the American government as much as I do. So we're perfectly on a we're in agreement on that score.
I still think that the absolute only way to see and experience the true Egypt is with you. Some of the most amazing experiences I have ever had in my entire life. Yeah, okay, you were a slave driver. We walked for days, and it was 200 million degrees, and then it was freezing, but it was the most.
What time of the year was our trip?
We were there first of the year. We were there in February.
That's not hot then.
Well, it just appeared that way.
No, well, maybe we had a warm spell, but no, I mean, if we're there in April or May, then it gets hot. But anyway, yes, I'm a slave driver, because otherwise, if you're not up at that hour in the morning, you miss stuff. And as you know, there's so much to see, and so I'm very happy to be a slave driver. But yeah, I mean, my trips, actually, there are a couple of other trips, not many, run by people who really know what they're talking about. More new agey than mine. Mine is, mine is kind of. It's experiential. And the first and most important thing, as I tell everybody when it's, get off the plane, is that the whole idea is to experience it in Egypt, and then we go through carefully and explain what we've just experienced, so that we can actually tell it to ourselves. We understand intellectually what we've experienced emotionally, and nobody else does that quite the same way. There are a few other people who are not just New Age wackos, who actually convey a real sense of Egypt. And other than that, though, it's just the academic nonsense. And there's Isis, and there's Osiris, and there's the king, and let's get into the shops quick so we can buy stuff.
Right. Grockles.
Well, that's right. Well, it's not the Grockles' fault. It's the Egyptologists' fault, who basically this is the Church of Progress at work. Nobody would dream of behaving the way they do in Egypt in a Gothic cathedral in France, because it's supposed to be superstition, and people don't think for themselves. And some do. They have these experiences. Of course, it's a different experience when you're there at 6 o'clock in the morning and nobody else is there, and when you're there at 11 o'clock in the morning and it's got 1 billion people and guides shouting in 14 different languages that there's Osiris and there's Isis and there's the king. So, yeah, it's different.
Dave is asking, do you think that the Egyptians inherited the pyramids?
Yeah, oh, absolutely. But they inherited something. In other words, the pyramids, the current pyramids, and we prove this, particularly the Khafra, the second and the third pyramids, are built upon something that was there before. We can't be sure if it was a pyramid that's there before, but the architectural style is radically different. Whenever you see two radically different architectural styles employed in the same building, you know that you're looking at two different time periods or time frames for their construction. So yeah, something is there before, and probably once the paradigm changes and a whole bunch of young, smart people understand that the old stuff is incorrect, they start making progress in a hurry, whereas until that happens, until that happens, it's a problem because it's all a bunch of, a number of lone heretics like myself, sort of struggling to get the work out without any intellectual, without any, let's say, scholarly backup or funding or anything like that. So, so it's very difficult to put together a great, let's say, a concerted scholarly attack on whatever the problem may be. But once it gets accepted, I mean, as an example, Schock always uses this example because he's a paleontologist as well as geologist, geophysicist, that in 1838, I mean, the dinosaurs, people have been discovering dinosaur bones from time immemorial, but nobody knew what they were. Some thought they were extinct animals, others thought they were hoaxes, others thought that there was something that God left, and there was no agreement as to what these extraordinary huge bones were that they were finding. And then in 1838, Cuvier, who was one of the founders of geology, wrote a paper in which he said that these were extinct animals. And it's not that it was original, that other people had said that. He just put the evidence together in such a way that nobody could argue with it anymore, or its time had come. This is the strange thing. The time comes for certain things, and then all of a sudden, what was impossible 10 years ago is just accepted, and everyone says, oh, yeah, of course. So something of that sort. So all of a sudden, Cuvier said that these were extinct animals, and within 20 or 30 years, the museums of the world were filled with reconstructed dinosaurs. So it's a bit like that with the ancient wisdom. Once the reigning, the Church of Progress paradigm is broken through, once the ramparts are pulled down, then things happen in a hurry, assuming there's any civilization left, but things that happen in a hurry and there might not be, because this is no fooling around what's going on now, which makes the whole Egyptian study all the more fascinating and consequential.
Hey, here is something very fascinating. Richard asks, if the pyramids were polished, mirror-like when new, would they have appeared blue like the sky?
That's a good question. I don't think so. I mean, the pyramids, they had different kinds of casing stones on them. For example, the Menkaure pyramid it was a combination of granite and limestone. The Great Pyramid is very fine Tura white limestone, which sort of yellows down a little bit over the ages. But even now, the few casing stones that remain are pretty white. No, I mean, I think they would have been like white marble. I mean, marble, for example, perfectly polished white marble doesn't reflect blue. It just kind of reflects the sunlight. I'm pretty sure of that. Good question, but I'm not.
Yes.
I don't think so. I don't think they'd be blue. I think they'd be gleaming white. Like. I mean, what's a white? When you see a white building nowadays in the sunlight, it doesn't look blue. Only if it were glass would it be blue.
Well, John, we're unfortunately getting to the end of time. Oh my!
Well, we're not quite at the end of time, but we might be at the end of our time here.
That's right. But I wanted to mention that really want people to go to your website, www.jawest, JAWEST.net.
Or .com, both.
All right.
Mm-hmm.
Lots of exciting articles and information, and of course information about your tours.
Oh yeah, actually, I should say though, in fact, because I don't even have efficiency is not one of my great virtues. I don't even have the information, the updated information on the upcoming tours. But there will be one. The next one is with the Enneagram group, and that's a dedicated trip and not open to the public. But the one after that is March 13th to 26th of 2012. That's the next trip. So anybody interested in with those dates, email me. You've got my emails on the website, and with a bit of luck, if Egypt doesn't explode, and I don't think it will, what I do think is that tourism is going to remain at a very low level, which is terrible for the poor Egyptians, but wonderful for us. And I'd be virtually certain that by March, it will still be way down, and Egypt will be a very different kind of experience. Anyway.
All right. Now, John, your books are still available on your website, right?
On my website and, on Amazon and all of that, yes.
Right.
So if you
highly
if you get them from me directly, they're signed, reducing their value by a certain amount, but nevertheless, some people like that.
Yes, and your handwriting is actually legible, so that's good. But this has been a pleasure. I appreciate it so much, and it's always good to talk to you. And
my pleasure too, Leena. And
will you come back?
Where?
Here at Epic.
Oh, on Epic. Sure. Yeah, I'm happy to. But I mean, how much? Yeah, well, there's a lot more to talk about, but I don't know about another hour and a half. But yeah, there's a lot of things that we didn't even touch upon. Yeah, it's a big subject. Well, as you know, we talk nonstop on my trip for about 8 hours a day, and I'm still rushing all along, all the time. We didn't get to talk about the mathematics, and we didn't get to talk about the symbolism, the specifics of the symbolism and the mythology. So yeah, there's lots still more to talk about. Maybe let's see what kind of a reaction we get from audience feedback, and we'll take it from there.
All right. Thanks a lot. I appreciate it so much. And just wanted to mention that information can be found on the Epic sites, www.epicvoyagers.com, and on Facebook and on YouTube. And next Monday, everybody, please tune in. It'll be something else. Epic Director of Investigations, James Clarkson, is going to be talking to Darren Thompson of Whisper. Very, very secret Whisper. It's going to be something else. Nobody ever whispers about this stuff. So come and listen. And that'll be next Monday, same time, same channel. And you've been listening to John Anthony West and me. Good night, everybody.
Thank you, Leena.
Thank you for being with us tonight. Please join us again next Monday evening for Extraordinary Phenomena Investigations Council's Epic Voyages. I'm Roger Peacock for Epic. Until next time.